All right, so Manifest Destiny. Let's look at Texas and the Mexican War. So first of all, there's a clash of cultures during this time. There's a question between Americans and the Spanish who had owned this land. The question was, who owns this right here? What's the border between the US and Spain? Because according to the Louisiana Territory, whose border lines were not very definite, weren't very clear, this territory here of Texas belonged to them. But the Spanish would say, nope, this is the border right here, and this land belongs to Spain. So there's a question going on of who owned Texas. So here's the thing. First of all, let's look back at the Adams-Onis Treaty. Now remember, this was signed before Mexico was its own country, when Spain controlled the land. And it basically said the U.S. gets Florida, that Spanish territory goes as far as there, and that the U.S. is going to stay out of Texas, that this is the border between the United States and Spain, and that the U.S. is going to stay out of there. So Spain gets claim to that land. Now, a Tejano is a Mexican living in Texas. So there were many, many Mexicans living in Texas because Texas belonged to Spain and then Mexico once Mexico became its own country. Now, empresarios were people that were given land by the Spanish, basically promised land so that they could move into the land and work it. They wanted to build up their economy. They didn't want the land to just sit there. They wanted somebody to work the land and grow things and trade things and build up their economy. So this guy right here was the first empresario. He was the first American who was given the right to take people into Texas in order to work the land. His name is Moses Austin. Did you hear me? Austin. We're talking about Texas here, people. So Moses Austin was given the right to go get that land. So he unfortunately died, so that didn't work out so well for him. He never had the chance to do this. But we'll get back to that in a second. Now, in the meantime, Mexico becomes its own country. So Mexico says, all right, well, we had empresarios set up, but I don't know what we're going to do about it. Well, this guy, Stephen Austin, he's the son of Moses. He goes to Mexico and he says, hey guys, you know, Spain and my dad had this deal set up where he would go and bring people over to work the land. And Mexico said, yeah, all right, come on in. Let's do it. So Stephen Austin gets together a group of about 300 people. Here's the list of the old 300 as they're referred to. And this group of the old 300 and Stephen Austin go into Mexican territory in Texas to work the land. Now, they're the first of that. But the thing is, there were lots more that followed. There were many other empresarios that ended up coming over, bringing American settlers with them. So even though it was established that Texas belongs to Mexico, there were a lot of Americans and Tejanos living within Texan borders. Now, here's the thing. The rule is they had to follow the rules. Well, what were the rules? They had to learn to speak Spanish. They had to become Mexican citizens. So they had to give up American citizenship and become Mexican citizens. They had to become Catholic because Spain and Mexico were very, very Catholic countries. So they had to become Catholic. And most Americans were Protestant. So that was something that they had to change. And they had to obey Mexican laws. So those are the rules that they had to follow. Now, you know that Americans at the time don't always follow the rules that they didn't want to follow. So they didn't learn to speak Spanish. They didn't become Mexican citizens. They didn't convert to Catholicism. And they didn't necessarily obey Mexican laws. So they set up this deal, but many of them didn't follow the rules of the deal, which caused some problems. So the Mexican government establishes this decree, which is an order given by somebody in authority. And this decree basically said, yeah, guess what? We're not having any more Americans coming into our land. There is a ban on Americans coming into Mexican territory. We don't want you. We can't trust you. Go away. So this guy basically makes himself dictator of Mexico. Mexico was young, it was impressionable, and they had some good ideas of how they were going to be run. But then this guy, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, he takes over, he makes himself dictator, and, well, the people don't love him, but, you know, he's kind of the leader, not just politically, but he's a military leader. And Stephen Austin basically goes to him and says, hey, buddy, do me a favor. Lift the ban and make Texas its own independent state. Lopez basically said, nah, all right, we'll lift the ban. But are you crazy? No, we're not going to give you Texas. Are you kidding me? No, 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 that's not happening. So they got the one thing, they got the ban lifted so that Americans could continue to move into Texas, but they were not about to give Texas up and make it its own independent state full of mostly Americans and a few Tejanos. So the struggle for independence begins because tensions are mounting and things get ugly, and basically what it comes down to is a cannon. At the Battle of Gonzales, which is the first battle of the war for Texas to gain its independence, um, Gonzales is right here. See this right here? That's Gonzales. Now, Gonzales, at Gonzales, there was a fort with a cannon. Well, Mexico said, that's our cannon, give it back. And the people at Gonzales, the Americans at Gonzales, said, as you can see on the flag, come and take it. That's a pretty bold statement to make to a general who has made himself dictator of a country. That is a very bold statement. Come and take it? Well, yeah, he's going to go come and take it. All right, so at San Antonio, which is located right here, the Americans actually did a pretty good job of beating the Mexicans and taking that city. But that was going to backfire on them because this place is going to be an awful, awful slaughter. This is the Alamo, and the Alamo is at San Antonio. And in San Antonio, Santa Anna was not going to, well, give up, so to speak. Santa Anna was going to go after the Americans, and they are going to go and hide in the Alamo. So the Battle of the Alamo, right here, again in San Antonio, was a massacre. It was an awful, awful massacre. You've got Santa Anna, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, really we just never call him Santa Anna. He is leading Mexican troops. He's leading about 6,000 Mexican troops. Now, the leaders of the Americans are Davy Crockett, who was a great frontiersman. If you think of a guy in a raccoon hat, that's Davy Crockett. He was kind of this folk legend, but he was actually also a U.S. congressman, so he was a great leader. This guy was another leader, Jim Bowie, if you think of the Bowie knife, if you know anything about that. He was the guy that's named for. But the real leader of them was William Travis. He was the leader of the troops of the Alamo. Now, these guys were basically begging other Americans to come and help them, and others were not coming. Some were. Actually, Sam Houston was on his way. Didn't get there in time. But others were basically not helping the Americans and the Tejanos that were at the Alamo. Here's an outside view of the Alamo. Here's an inside view. Here's a view of the Mexicans breaching the walls, basically getting into the Alamo after 13 days. Think about that. There were 180 Americans and Tejanos that were inside the Alamo, and they held off 6,000 Mexican troops for 13 days. Now, in the end, they were all slaughtered. Travis died fighting. Bowie actually was bayoneted in his hospital bed at the end of the battle, and Crockett was actually one of the last people to be caught and killed. In fact, they killed everybody. I think there was legend that one child made it out alive. Um, they did not leave anybody. Again, Jim Bowie was in a hospital bed and they came and bayoneted him to death. So there was no mercy on the Americans and the Tejanos in the Alamo. But what they did, what these people within the Alamo did, was bought time for other Texans so that they could come and gather and get ready to fight the Mexicans. So here's the thing. On March 2nd, 1836, Texas declares its independence. They basically say, yep, we're not going to be part of Mexico anymore. We are going to be our own country. So Texas becomes its own country, the Lone Star Republic, on March 2nd, 1836. But just like the Americans in the Revolution, they hadn't won the war yet. They still had to earn it from Mexico. So they could say that they were independent, but really, without winning the war, it wasn't happening. So here's the thing. There was the Alamo that really revved people up, really ticked off Americans because of the way the Americans were treated by Mexicans, how ruthlessly they were treated. At Goliad, it was probably even worse. There were 350 Texans that surrendered. They surrendered, they gave up, and then they were all shot. They were executed, even though they had surrendered. Murdered ruthlessly by the Mexicans. So between that and the other, the battle cry at San Jacinto, which I'll get to in a second, became remember the Alamo, remember the Goliad. And with that in mind, we need to seek revenge for the men and women and children that died at the Alamo. and for the people that were executed at Goliad, we need to remember them and we need to fight for them. So at the Battle of San Jacinto, guess what happened? Santa Anna defeated, gave up, gave in. Texas became its own country, which I got to tell you, the Mexican people were not so happy with. They didn't like this dictator anyway, but then he gives up Texas to the Americans. None too happy with Santa Anna. So the Lone Star Republic is established. You've got Sam Houston, one of the generals that helped to win. In fact, he was the one that Santa Anna surrendered to at San Jacinto. And he was the president of Texas. He became the president of Texas, and it was its own state, its own country. Now, here's the thing. They wanted to be annexed. They wanted, in September of 1836, they applied to the United States for statehood. And the United States said, forget it. Forget it. We don't want you to be a state, because if you're a state, then Mexico is going to come after us. And we don't need that kind of tension right now. So, 10 years later, Texas basically says, hey, can we be a state? And the U.S. said, yeah, that's fine. Join us. You're fine. You're good. You're a state. So Texas in the beginning was not accepted for statehood back in 1836. But in 1845, they were accepted for statehood. And they became, again, a state within the United States. And this is what the U.S. looks like as a result.